Hi, this is Sergeant Betsy Brantner Smith with the National Police Association, and this is the NPA report. So, I have with me today one of those guests, and you know these are few and far between, where I kind of fangirl all over them because I'm so excited to have them on the show. This is a man that, and I told him this before the show, that whenever he comes on TV, and he is everywhere, um, that our household stops and we listen to him, we follow his podcast. And so he, of course, is a man that I want all of you to meet and I want all of you to get to know. Pastor Marc Little, welcome to the show.
So good to be with you and your audience. Thank you for the work that you do.
So, Pastor, I want to start with this because I don't know that everyone knows your background, but I'm going to guess that your first, big contact with law enforcement was when you were the victim of violent crime. Talk about that.
Thank you so much. I have to tell you, in July 31st of 1987, I came in contact really for the first time with first responders. And I actually started relationships with them because of the role that they played in my life. I was a student at USC. I just graduated in that previous May. And I didn't know this, Betsy, but the University of Southern California is in the middle of gang territory in Los Angeles. And I'd gone for 4 years really not knowing the danger that was around me. And I just so happened after graduation, I came back from what was the 32nd Street Market. I used to get a cheap loaf of bread. It was good, white bread. You know, anybody that loves peanut butter and jelly knows that you have to have white bread and Skippy creamy peanut butter. And that's what I was going to get. Oh, I was just thinking about it. I love it even to this day. But I was coming back at about 9:30 at night and on my way to my apartment. And my then girlfriend came out. She saw me coming, and she greeted me on the sidewalk. And she said, "Now, don't pay any attention to these people over here, on the sidewalk. Just keep walking." And men are hard-headed. I've learned that God gave us a partner for a reason. But that night, I didn't listen. She said, "Just ignore him." And sure enough, as we approached and got closer to my apartment door, this gray Jetta, a gold Jetta rather, was parked right there in the fire hydrant, no parking zone. And this form, this body that I really didn't pay much attention to, was bent over on the passenger side, was bent over the windshield on the passenger side of the car, pretending to fix something. And as I approached, Betsy, I heard him cry out, hey, can you help me fix this? Can you help me fix this? Not remembering what Tigra had just said, I said, "Sure, help you fix what?" And I approached him. And as I got closer to him, he turned around from bending over the windshield. He turned toward me and he pointed a 12-gauge shotgun in the center of my forehead and said, "Fix this." My hands went up in the air. Tigra ran, and he said, "Give me $100, at least $100. And everybody listen to this who is in law enforcement or has faced tragedy or trauma of this sort understands that time stops. And I could see his mouth saying, "Give me $100, at least $100 in slow motion." And I just had change. I was a starving college student who had just graduated, and I just emptied out the coins from my pocket. And by the grace of God, God's providential hand, he turned the gun around and he hit me with the butt end of the gun, of the shotgun. And I threw myself to the ground. He really didn't hit me hard enough to knock me down, but instinctively I just fell. I threw myself down thinking that it would be over. And then I saw him just cock that 12-gauge shotgun and pointed what it looked like at my head from about 3 feet away, maybe 5. And he pulled that trigger. And anybody in law enforcement or a first responder or somebody who's got a degree in medicine knows that the body, it's an amazing thing that God created. The body just all of a sudden goes into protection. I knew I was hit, but the body, the adrenaline, just all of a sudden begins to shield you from what just happened. The body is amazing. But I knew I'd been hit. Turns out I was hitting my main artery of my right leg with a 12 gauge bullet. And those pellets sprayed all throughout that leg. I could hear Tigra in the distance knocking on doors, screaming for help. And he got into that car, and I realized that there was a driver there as well. And they sped off. Long story short, after a period of time, I did live. They spent a lot of time trying to save my life at California Medical Hospital. When I got to the hospital, I had 1 unit of blood left, in a lot of pain. That adrenaline had worn off, and I was screaming for dear life. They saved me that night. And about 4 or 5 weeks later, I suffered my first operation that I'd ever had. And it was ultimately a right hip disarticulation. They took my entire right leg, but they saved my life. And that woman who witnessed me being gunned down by an 18-year-old black member of the Crips, terrible gang that is proliferated all throughout our nation, actually. That 18-year-old, raised by a grandmother, a single, really not an orphan, but raised by a grandmother without parents, product of the streets. I had a gang initiation that night. He was set to kill somebody. He had unsuccessfully tried the night before. The gun misfired. We found that out, of course, in court. He was caught. He turned himself in because there was a bit of a manhunt in Los Angeles that next day. I was pretty well known, the son of not then, but now Hall of Famer Floyd Little from the Denver Broncos. I had a lot of friends. They came to the hospital and interviewed me and really made a big deal of this shooting at USC off campus. But I did. I suffered a right hip disarticulation amputation. And now I walk around with a cane and a prosthesis as a reminder that I have a job to do, that tomorrow is not promised, and that everything that we do today needs to matter. So when you called me, Betsy, and I knew what you do and the focus that you have, this interview for me matters. And so I'm glad to be with you.
I so appreciate your explanation of that, because you could have gone so many different directions, right? So you decided to take what was literally a life-changing event. You obviously didn't descend into anger or bitterness, but you decided to continue to make a difference. So you continued your education, and now, and then again, now you've got your foot in so many different camps. Talk about what you're doing now, 30 some years later, to continue to make a difference.
Thank you for that great question. You know, for those who might be watching who have multiple talents, you'll understand. When you have your foot in a lot of doors, that's not always a good thing. You get to touch a lot of people. But I'm a lawyer. I went to law school right after that. I'm a pastor. I went to seminary after running one of the largest churches in Southern California. We bought and sold the Forum to Madison Square Garden. I ran that facility for many years. So I got entrenched in not just ministry, but in community. I don't like to use the word community activist because it applies to some folks that I don't really care for. But I'm a community builder for sure. I got very involved in politics, ended up laying hands and praying on President Trump in the cabinet room in 2020. My life has taken me in a lot of great places. I've helped a lot of people with what I do as a lawyer and as a pastor. My wife started a ministry that I'm now the spiritual covering for called No Longer Bound, Abortion and Miscarriage Recovery Ministry, where we walk men and women through the pain and shame of having had an abortion or a miscarriage. And that is very rewarding work. But what I do to pay the bills is I run a little C4 called Cure America Action, where I get to go around the country and talk about things in our community, our communities, based on capitalism, Christianity, and the U.S. Constitution, and how people of color in particular, but in general, how we have to be engaged in our own communities. We can't sit back because our constitutional republic is not what we think it is anymore. We have to be engaged. We have to talk to our neighbors. We have to talk in our church houses. We have to not separate faith from politics. I wrote a book about it called The Prodigal Republican, Faith and Politics, to just encourage people. I don't care what party you're affiliated with. I'm kingdom-minded, first and foremost. But we've got to take our faith into the voting booth so that we can change our communities. We are in charge of our destiny. We can't let people who are supposed to be representing us, who are sitting around getting rich because we send them to the State House or to Washington, D.C. On our representation. They're not doing that. So we have to hold them accountable. And so I'm about being engaged and keeping people aware of what's going on. That's a lot of stuff I do.
I know you are such a busy guy. Pastor, we saw, after 2014 and the justifiable police shooting of Michael Brown, and then after the death of George Floyd in 2020, we saw a lot of churches kind of embrace the defund the police movement, or at least the reimagine the police movement, and also the attack on our criminal justice system, kind of under the guise of, we need to keep people out of prison. And a lot of churches embrace the tenets of Black Lives Matter. And I've seen so many of your talks online where you talk about, and you tell people that, look, stop embracing Marxist policies like the Black Lives Matter organization, who espouses Marxist ideology. Can you talk? Because I think, again, that's such a difficult balance, because have people of color been wronged by American law enforcement in the last few years? Of course. There have been instances. Cops make mistakes. There are, some bad apples, and have been throughout my 40-year involvement in law enforcement. But how do we deal with all of that without blowing up our whole constitutional justice system?
I tell you, I hope I have enough time to answer that question, because it is at the heart of our communities. I ran for mayor in Inglewood, and I made sure that I first met with law enforcement. That's where I learned about community policing and broken windows and all of that. It's so critically important. So first, let me say, you started out with Michael Brown and George Floyd. We are experiencing even today the Ferguson effect, where because of the demonization of policing, our police officers, our men and women in blue, in many instances have backed up in communities. Why? Because their own upline superiors, the mayors and city councils, aren't backing them in their attempt to do their jobs. That is hurting our communities, and I don't blame them. This whole defund police movement is out of the Marxist playbook. We have to tell our communities to pay attention. What we are witnessing is this idea of social justice that is warped. It is out of the Marxist playbook. Social justice gone wrong is what it really is. There was a poll that was done after George Floyd, when the narrative was running rampant that Black people were being slaughtered every day in the streets of America by law enforcement. It was a lie then, it's a lie now. People just don't pay attention. They don't do their own homework. There were at the time some 19 fatal police shootings of unarmed people of color. 19. That is a very, very small percentage. In fact, the opposite was true. Where there's black on black crime, within our own communities is where the crime is greatest. White on white, black on black, etc. The problem is not white police officers on black men. That's not where the problem is. And so our challenge is that we have a false narrative promoted by people who don't care about our communities. They have a grift. Black Lives Matter was and is a grift. What does that mean? They are fleecing the communities. They're fleecing corporations. They're going around with a narrative that is a lie in order to fatten their own pockets. We learned that they raised $100 million, bought properties, paid their relatives, and didn't even look back and give Michael Brown's family a dime. It's a shame. So to answer your question, what do we do about it? Well, the first thing that we have to do is not be afraid to tell the truth. Because we have a society that is so divided along race. Race has been lifted as an idol in the culture. What is an idol? Anything that replaces God is an idol. We have let race become a thing that we worship. All you've got to do is cry racism, and all of a sudden everybody stops in their tracks. We need to stop that. We need to tell the truth and shame the devil, as we say, as the old folks used to say in my community. Tell the truth and shame the devil. So that's number one. Number two, we also have to understand what we're dealing with, even with what I do as a black conservative Republican. I don't care who hears it, and I don't care who doesn't like it. I'm very confident in my identity, and who I identify with now at this point in my life. But the broader problem is cultural affiliation opposed to following your own faith constitution. We have more people, and it's just not black folks, we have more people who are more interested in being a part of a broader cultural experience, whether it's sororities, fraternities, or ethnicity. They're more concerned with that than simply telling the truth. And so we have to identify that. We have to tell people where their error is. Why choose cultural affiliation over the truth? Why choose color over Christ? And that's what I have to say. I'm just not going to do that. I'm going to stand on truth, and I'm going to keep shouting it from the mountaintops, because that is what Matthew chapter 5, verses 13 through 16 talks about. Being salt and light in the culture. We have to push against the darkness of this culture that is gobbling us up. We haven't done a good job of that. Starting in 1962, when they took prayer out of schools, our culture has descended ever since. And we're now trying to take it back. We'll see how that goes.
And when you talk about that, I'm so glad you brought up prayers in the schools, because now we look at our schools and what they have, how they have descended into this sort of a mirror of counterculture, if you will, where we see the anti-religion, we see the race baiting, and we see the anti-police narrative. One of the things that we hear about at the National Police Association is from police parents, moms and dads, whose little kids go to school, and they are told, oh, what your parents do for a living is bad, and you're bad, and your parents hate people of color and all of that. How do we combat that?
Well, I tell you, thank you so much. I referred a moment ago to the Gallup poll that was taken. And I want those families to know, maybe they missed the poll, but I want them to know that in the black community, when the Gallup poll was done after George Floyd, we learned something, that 18% of blacks support police in our communities. And an additional 2% for a total of 20%, actually want more. So don't believe the lie that you're not wanted. Don't believe the lie that you're not appreciated. If you weren't in our communities would be war zones worse than they are today. We thank you so much for sending out your loved ones to risk their lives every day to make our community safe.
Pastor, that is so well said, and I can't thank you enough for saying it. Please tell people where they can find you, your website, your social media, the podcast, Team Never Quit. Tell us all of that so people can stay in touch with you and what you're doing.
Thank you so much. I can be reached across all social media at Real Marc T. Little. Don't forget the T as in Thomas. Marc with a C. Real Marc T. Little across all social media platforms. You know, my podcast is the Marc Little Show that's available on Spotify and everywhere where podcasts are. And just pray for me because, you know, if I'm not talking to somebody like Betsy, I don't really enjoy just getting on my podcast and talking to my Yeti microphone. So pray for me. People keep asking me to do it more. It's supposed to be weekly, but I struggle in that area. So just pray for me that the Lord would just give me the push that I need to do that more often. But I can't thank you enough for listening, and I just pray God's blessing over the police community, active duty and retired. We thank you so much. And for our first responders who show up and do the hard work and see the tough things. Thank you so much.
Amen. Pastor, thanks so much for spending time with us today. And if you would like more information about the National Police Association, visit us at nationalpolice.org.
Join the National Police Association in supporting our brave men and women in blue. Every day they put their lives on the line to keep us safe. But they need our help to continue their mission. Black Lives Matter, Antifa, progressive prosecutors, and the rest of the anti-police forces receive millions in donations from extremists like George Soros and woke companies like Amazon, Coca-Cola, Microsoft, and Google, to name a few. The National Police Association is fighting them in courts around the country, including the United States Supreme Court, defending officers who are being attacked for doing their jobs. Additionally, the National Police Association works year-round to pass tough-on-crime legislation to put and keep criminals behind bars. Consider going to nationalpolice.org and donating just $5 to keep us in the fight. Together, we can win. That is National